Welcome to Digication Scholars Conversations. I'm your host, Jeff Yan. In this episode, you will hear part one of my conversation with Joe Tranquillo from Bucknell University. More links and information about today's conversation can be found on Digication's Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Full episodes of Digication Scholars Conversations can be found on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Welcome to Digication Scholars Conversations. I am your host, Jeff Yan. My guest today is Joe Tranquillo. He is the Associate Provost for Transformative Teaching and Learning and a professor at Biomedical Engineering at Bucknell University. Joe, welcome.
Thanks, Jeff. Glad to be joining you.
Joe, I have so much to learn from you. I am really looking forward to this conversation. You and I had met just, I wouldn't say a few years ago, but started working together at, the Bucknell's implementation of e-portfolios maybe a couple years ago now. Am I right?
Yeah. I think it was a few years ago that we started to chat.
Yep. And through that experience, I feel like every time I meet with you, and we've met a lot of times, every time I meet with you, I learn something completely new about you. So that's fascinating because every time it's like some hidden talent. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do as the Associate Provost for Transformative Teaching and Learning? What does that mean? I think we got the professor part at
Sure.
Biomedical Engineering, but like, what does an Associate Provost for Transformative Teaching and Learning mean at Bucknell University?
Great question. When someone else figures it out, let me know. I'm the first person in this role, and so I think I get to be a little bit entrepreneurial with it, kind of scope out what it is. There's been a long history of this position kind of being proposed, and there have been different variations of it. So I'm totally honored to be the first person in it, but it means that I'm getting to invent pieces of it. I think about this as there's kind of a management piece of it that is really about overseeing certain groups, hopefully helping them work more closely together. The whole idea of this position was around student success and thriving. There's a lot of other pieces underneath that, such as retention numbers and grad numbers and things of that sort. But really broadly, it was about student success, student thriving. So there are a variety of groups who are already doing that work. And as the person sort of overseeing those groups, the new management component of this position is how do you get them to work together to do some things more collaboratively on a little bit of a larger scale. But then the part that really excites me is the potential for some leadership pieces where I get to build some new things. I get to maybe, uncover some things that haven't been done in the past. Both are interesting to me, but my heart is often in the, what can we do that's a little bit new together, that's experimental, where we really don't know where it's going to end up. And so it's a bit of an adventure along the way.
Well, you're very humble by nature, but you're also just got that spark of a curious learner at heart. I that's what I
Well,
really like
we
about you.
all should be, right. I mean, this is
Mhm.
this is what makes life fun, right? Is when you're curious about stuff and you can see even in the smallest things something that you can learn from. And I mean, I have my my masks here, right? And it's an exercise that I actually do with my students a lot of times. You pick up a common object and say, if you were going to create an entire course about the object, right? That object. It doesn't have to be an object. It could be an idea or anything too. What would it have in it? And students often look at you like, are you nuts? Like, how could you make an entire course about, right? Masks, right? Or spoons or whatever, right? It doesn't matter with, a pen. And it's amazing because after 30 seconds of being stuck, they very often go, "Oh, wow, yeah, we could talk about the history of it, or we could talk about how they're made, or we could talk about why the elastics are the sizes they are, or why did they choose this, and why is there stuff printed on the ends, and why is there this, why is there that." And they very quickly realize that, yeah, it would be really easy to create a course, and they start thinking about um, who would be guest speakers and what the assignments would be, right? They all of a sudden it kind of blossoms, and over the course of 5 minutes they have a whole course specked out. And I've even had a couple of groups say, we don't think this is a course. We think this could be a whole minor, right? This could be a whole thing. It's like, yes, you get it, right? You
Yeah,
get it. It's to say you can take sometimes the simplest things and be curious about them.
yeah.
So, you obviously don't have time to approach every single thing around you in that way, but um, yeah, it does make life fun when you can do that.
Well, that's. I know that for listeners right now, they're like, well, what are we going to be talking about courses on spoons and masks? But I actually wanted to just say how I'm starting to link these patterns together. You are, in fact, exactly the type of people that always are going to be talking about frameworks and systems and ways of approaching things, approaching the ways of thinking about things. And I think it
Mhm.
is that makes you successful in being in this role that has been sort of newly created at Bucknell. Um, can you tell us a little bit about just your background? Because you're a professor of biomedical engineering, but you also have a lot of other wide range of interests. Tell us about that. Tell us about D school. Tell us about
Sure.
all of those types of things that you get your hands into.
Yeah, I think it's one of the reasons, frankly, why I wanted to come to Bucknell was so that I could continue pursuing some things that might be unusual for a professor, or in some cases, especially a biomedical engineering professor. Kind of right the stereotype of what you would think of as being someone in biomedical engineering. Um, Again, I don't even exactly know where to start with this, so I'll start somewhere and we can build out from there. Let's see. Through middle school and high school, I honestly was thinking I was going to be a musician. I was totally into jazz trumpet, all the way. Was playing, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours sometimes a day. The classic thing you'd think of someone who wants to go off into a career in music. Got into the Berklee School of Music, went to the audition, made it through the audition, and realized during the audition that this is making me kind of sick. Just not even physically sick because I had auditioned for things before, but just a realization of, do I really want to do this as a career? And there's kind of a old Jesuit thing that's out there of, what are you good at? What do you love, and what does the world need? And your career should probably be something where you can say, yes to all three of those things. Again, you'd mentioned the frameworks, right? There's one framework, right, of kind of thinking about things.
Mhm.
And I realized that while I loved it and I was good at it, it was not what I thought I had to really offer the world. And the more I thought about it, I wasn't sure that I would love it as a career either. So deferred that, decided to go to a liberal arts school, was thinking I was going to go into philosophy, took a couple philosophy courses, and unfortunately, as so often happens, my first couple of professors were less than inspiring. And so I started taking physics classes. And those lit me up, and then somehow got sucked into engineering. So you can see sort of
Yeah.
the slope. Some might call it a downward slope, to end up in engineering. But I think that creative piece that was there from jazz improv, and the idea of being able to, again, look at a mask and pull out all of the pieces, that was kind of a piece of philosophy, right? How can you look at a mask in a different way, or look at it
Mhm.
for what it represents?
Yeah.
Those were pieces that I kind of pulled along with me. And so when I became an engineer, they were things that I naturally brought with me.
Mhm.
Um, and they led to all sorts of other pieces. I won't go into the other things, but I ended up getting into like improv dance and Aikido and a number of other different pursuits. By the way, I know you're an artist, you're a designer. I am. I haven't seen your work yet, but I know it'll be better than mine because I can draw stick figures and things like that. So, but yeah, I think there's what lenses and ideas are you adding? And again, it makes the world a richer place.
Yeah, I think that it it is. You're right, and that it's fascinating for me to hear about your pursuit in music to the level of essentially could have been a professional musician, and but at some point started to sort of do this sort of thinking about, like, is it something that I want to do, and how do I see that vision as being some sense of changing the world. Now, fast forward to today, I think that in 2022, students coming to colleges today are often looking for that, are looking for, maybe they haven't figured it out, maybe they have figured it out, maybe they have some kind of, maybe they have several options or several ideas, but they are seeking very much so a path and a space to sort of um, help make those potentially critical decisions on what am I going to be and how am I going to be useful to this
Mhm.
world. And I want to say a little bit more so than um, even if we go back, let's say 20 years ago, because that was when I felt like, there was a big part of it was how do you pay rent,
Yep.
and how do you not having to go back to live with your parents. That was like a
Yeah,
huge
yeah,
factor.
exactly.
But today I think that it's a little bit, it's changed a little bit, which I
I
really
I
like. Yeah.
I do. I think it's changed, and I think something that is, I don't wanna say it's at the core of it, but I think it's a piece of it is, at least in the States, we pride ourselves on
Right.
being
Hmm.
very
Yep.
independent, right? The
Yep.
rugged individualist, all these, right? We can go back through the history of, this idea of holding up the concept of the individual. I think a lot of where the I want to make lots of money for me, and I want to have a great job for me, and I
Right.
want to have,
Right.
right, like a lot of that was for
Yeah.
me. And it wasn't entirely myopic. You would talk to folks of our generation and some past generations, they wanted to do it for a family as well. But the circle of influence, and if you continue to ask why, right, five times, why do
Right.
you want to be an investment banker, right, they would get to some point where they would say, well, I want a comfortable life for me and my family, right, or something like that. And so the scope of what they of why they were going to invest a significant amount of time and energy into something was very much still in keeping with that individualistic mindset. I i i sense, and it's obviously not everyone, it's but diverse population in terms of their mindsets, but I sense that there's more and more younger folks, and I have two kids who are, in this generation, they are thinking more interdependently. And again, we could get into
Hmm.
East and Western
Yep.
philosophies and ideas and concepts, but I do think that there is on the rise a more interdependent um, way of thinking, and I want to dissect that out just a little bit, because I think in our generation it was about globalization, and it was about being intercultural, things like that. But even that still had an individualistic undercurrent to
Sure.
it.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. Yeah. Hmm.
yeah, there was, you were still wanting to do that because the world was becoming more international, and so it behooved you to actually, right, do that.
Right.
I think this, and again, this is maybe just me being hopeful, um, that we are getting a generation of students who are thinking in more interdependent ways. And what this leads to is, right, caring about a wider sphere of what they care about, where they're probably still at the center, right? I deal with college students, they're 18 to 22 by and
Mhm.
large. They are still individualistic, and still about themselves, but they want that sphere around them, that sphere of influence, to be far wider, and expanding over the course of their life and their
Yep.
career. And it leads to them caring about things like the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and other, huge challenges that
Mhm.
aren't specific to any one particular region. Their span is the entire globe.
What I mean, that doesn't that really sort of um, lead us to, or maybe should lead you to talk a little bit about, what does a modern sort of curriculum look like? I mean, you are, in fact, your role is for transformative teaching and learning, right? So, what is the what is the sort of the a new pedagogy, or let's call it, what's an up-to-date pedagogy in 2022,
Hmm.
or a curriculum look like for students?
Right.
Like there's and maybe like there's always going to be content specific things, right? So
Sure.
domain specific things, like whether it's in uh, bioengineering or in computer engineering versus in art and design, right?
Right.
But there's something, it feels like, you know more going on in the modern curriculum now,
Hmm.
um, that sort of supersede, or that encapsulates, or that maybe that all these different domains and subject areas embraces, in addition to what's just native to the study itself.
Sure. Yeah, I think, obviously there's a lot to unpack there. And I'll, declare up front, I'm a liberal arts person, through and through, despite having the biomedical engineering title. It's
We'll
again
let
one
you
of the
prove
reasons.
that to us, okay?
It's one of the reasons why, again, I wanted to be at a place like Bucknell, was,
Yeah.
be an engineer, but still retain
Mm.
that liberal arts nature. And I think one of the difficulties is that the definition of the liberal arts, and I'm not going to go through the whole history of it, but it's changed and it's morphed, and what folks have considered the liberal arts has changed over time. And it's not that one definition or theme or whatever is right or wrong, but I do think that going back to the why, right? What is it that's important about being a liberally educated citizen of, right, the world? And obviously, just to clarify for anyone who's listening, when you say liberal arts, you don't mean liberal politically. This is the right, because
Okay, yeah.
that's a big misconception sometimes, is that this is about like creating folks who are going to be liberals, right? It's not. It's meant to be a mindset that you actually take with you. And typically, what this has been is, how do you have habits of mind and practices um, that will help you be at a great citizen, right? Not just a good citizen, but a great
Mhm,
citizen. And we don't need to go into citizenship or anything like that, right? But it's not the
mhm,
passive definition of just I go and vote and all of that. How do I actually give back in some way?
right.
And the way I would think of it, and sort of the origins of it, was, what are the skills and tools and mindsets that you need to do that, to be a true great citizen of the world? And what that has been changes over time, right? I mean, the world is changing. The world obviously has been changing over several hundred years. I mean, it's changed in the last 2 years. And so I think this idea that being an educated citizen of the world is going to be some static thing is a complete fallacy. It by nature should change. um, then you get down to, okay, well, then what are those things? What are the things that would allow you to become a liberally educated citizen? And somewhere, and this is going to be dangerous for me to say as somebody who's going to label me as an engineer, somewhere along the lines, and I don't know exactly when it was. There are different markers of it. You could say 100 years ago, 80 years ago, 50 years ago, certain disciplines took up the mantle of, we are the things that are at the center of this and at the core. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, and I actually wouldn't even debate that. And they're typically the humanities and the arts, pieces of the natural sciences and math. But we also shed some things. So we shed physical education, right? That used to be a core component of the liberal arts, and it was there because at the time it was there. It was something you needed to be a productive citizen in
Mhm,
the world.
right.
When it wasn't, we kind of shed it. So this is a long roundabout way to set up I think the answer, or what I think maybe an answer would be to your question, and that is, today, 2022, what are those things? What is that? And I can tell you, my institution, like lots of institutions, has a mission statement. We
Mhm, right.
have, learning objectives. We have all those other things. And the problem is that, you mentioned frameworks earlier. They're not easy frameworks to pick up and use out in real situations. They're either too big and too broad, right? Some statements with a bunch of words, like many mission statements, that just sound great, or they're at the level of granularity of these learning objectives, which have everything in the kitchen sink in them. You're going to be a creative and curious explorer of blah blah blah, blah, right? And then you move on to the second one, right? And it's all about, right. So
Mhm.
they get to the point where they're hard to actually work with in any operational way. Um, Before I reveal kind of a thought on what a framework could be, do you want to respond to any of that? Because I know there was a lot there.
No, no, no. Please keep going. I'm really enjoying this.
Okay.
I do think though that when you are talking about the framework, there is probably some good reference to what's happened in businesses in the last 10-20 years as well, and deriving to core values and things like that. But please keep going.
Absolutely, and I think I'll emphasize that point in a minute. But one thing I do want to clarify is that I think there are a number of schools that don't identify as a traditional liberal arts school. It doesn't matter, right? I mean, you could be the most polytechnic school of polytechnic schools, or it could be a music school, or it could be whatever, right? It doesn't matter. These are still skills that you would need to contribute. So if you are a musician and you're going to be a performer, having some of the traditional liberal arts skills is going to help you be a better performer. So even if it's not a liberal arts school, they'll help.
Mhm.
Um, so back to that idea of the values, I think you are 100% right on that. Traditionally, companies have their big high level statement that they have, and they do have sub goals, but they have a couple of pillars, 3 4. Sometimes they're words, sometimes they're phrases, sometimes some companies have only one, right? There's like one central pillar of what they do that helps guide their thinking, and when they're about to take on anything new, it gets passed through those lenses as a kind of a check to make sure that this fits with the intentions.
Right.
So I have three of them, and this was by looking at our strategic plans and all of these other things, that these documents that have guidance. The first one was genuine caring for other people, genuine deep caring for other people. And this is not about a whole group. It's literally one on one. You're meeting another person, maybe two, possibly. But the reason for calling it that is there are touches of empathy, the concepts of empathy. Um, there's the ideas of having and building and sustaining relational connections with people, not transactional connections. If you want to go philosophical on it, right?
Mhm.
This is Kant's categorical imperative, right? Not using other people as a means to your end. So again, there's lots of components to this that, yes, you could put learning objectives there, and you could put all sorts of fancy terms that folks would use um, around it. Intercultural humility, right? So there's lots of buzzwords that we have, but they all, to some degree, are pointing to this idea of how do you treat another person as a person.
Mhm.
Um, so that's one piece. The second piece is, how can you be a good steward of all of the environments that you inhabit? And what I mean by that is, if you want to just start with your family level, that's fine. That's one of the environments you inhabit. But if you're a student, so is your residence hall, and so is your calculus class, and so is your tennis club, and right. So those are all environments that you inhabit, but you're also often part of some sort of larger community, right? Your university or the city that you're in, and you can keep expanding that out to the point where you're all the way up to the level of the entire world. And again, there's lots of buzzwords embedded in here. Community engagement. You can talk about the Anthropocene, right? All of that. Those are all getting
Mhm.
at different levels of these environments. The dilemma, but also the part that is where the work needs to be done, is how do you simultaneously be a good steward of all of these environments?
Mhm.
And that's where things get to be tricky, and it's where a lot of times issues come up. Is, well, I could do something that's great for my family, but it may not be so good for my community, right? How do you actually think through that? And the idea is, okay, well, you need some tools, you need some ideas and frameworks to help you think through those difficult questions and come up with your own decision. And again, we can get into some
Mhm.
ideas of what some of those are if we want to dig into that more.
Right.
But the third piece is constantly investing in yourself. And here again, staying away from the buzzwords necessarily of lifelong learning. And I know that that's been a buzzword for a long time. It is that, but it's more than that. It's understanding what excites you, what's going to fire you up, how you're going to better understand who you are. So again, this
Mm.
brings up issues of identity, and if we wanted to get into intersectionality, right? So there's lots of different pieces in that. Continually investing in yourself. The thing at the center, if you imagine these as sort of three spheres that are kind of out there, the thing in the center that I think unites them is purpose. And what is your purpose? And operationally, the way this would work, especially with 18 to 22-year-olds or just
Mhm.
anyone probably, is you probably come in with a sense of purpose, which helps fuel your work in those three places, right? Genuine care for others, being a good steward of your environment, um, continuous investment in yourself. But in doing that work, you may re envision, redefine, expand, change your purpose. So there's a push and pull between those three pillars and what you imagine your purpose to be, um, that helps motivate you to go deeper. So I think the piece of this that again goes deeper pedagogically is, how do we give students the tools that they need to go deeper in each of these areas? And again, because I'm a systems person and have an engineering training, I think about models, right? Folks creating models, and
Right.
in this case they're mental conceptual models. Each one of those three things you can attach model building to. When it comes to the individual, it's a or sorry, the genuine caring for others, the model that you're building is, how do you create a model of another person? And again, you can call that
Mm.
empathy if you want, but through
Right.
our like the two of our conversations,
Sure.
without even really knowing it, I've been creating a model of you, right? Who is Jeff, right? Who is he? What makes him tick? How does he work, right? So that when I work with you and we have conversations, it allows me to have that relational connection with you.
Mhm.
And the only way I can really do that is to have some sense of who you are. Otherwise, I'm talking to somebody else. And the same thing goes for the good steward of an environment. To be a good steward, you have to have some good internal model of those environments, a good model of the world around you. And again, we can attach that to, why are you taking these courses about, whatever you name your favorite course? Well, some of those courses are going to be about you have building a much richer and more interconnected model of the world. And then we get to the third piece, which is the continuous investment in yourself. Well, the only way you can really do that is to have a pretty good model of who you are, and
Right.
where you are, and right, where you might be going. So again, I'm going to stop there and just see if you have any follow-ups.
I think this is fantastic, and for in that last, I mean, there's so much that you had mentioned that I just love this. By the way, so the very last thing that you said was about investing in yourself and having the model of who you are, and that in fact is a lot of and you and I talk a lot about reflection and
Hmm.
in e-portfolios, but also just in learning in general, right? um, uh, I find that to be a wonderful way to reshape that lens. Um, because sometimes I also even find that when talking to people and they say, "Well, I should reflect," but when it comes to the nitty gritty of doing the reflection, though,
Hmm.
sometimes is, and we will talk a little bit more about this because you're an expert at this, but I also find it, like by changing the lens into invest in yourself, create
Hmm.
a model of yourself, and so that you can understand better how to invest in yourself and in what areas are you you know
Hmm.
benefiting from it and so on. And that in some really interesting ways is a whole different ways of getting someone to be reflective about their learning.
Yeah, I absolutely. I think, just to pick up on that last piece there, I think we have a tendency, and I say we broadly, not just students, this is, I
Mhm.
think, everyone in
Yeah, sure.
general, to have this idea that reflection is something that you probably should do, but you won't, because it takes time away from the doing, right? The actual action part of it. And the action part of it feels more productive. It feels like you're moving forward. Whereas the reflection part kind of feels like, I'm sort of stalled and I'm not really doing anything. There's obviously tons of learning theory out there about, the role and the importance of having reflective moments,
Mhm.
to stop. And the cynical part of me would say, without that, you're just an automaton, right? An automaton is something that just mindly does things, right? And
Right.
and I think if you're going to have any long term plans, if you're going to have any long term direction, in just about anything, there has to be reflection built in some fashion. Now, some of the most powerful learners, I think, don't even realize that they're reflecting. They don't realize that how much reflection is a part of their life. They're just not carving out dedicated time to do it. And
Mm.
that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Um, so I don't want the perception to be that reflection is sitting down with your journal, right, and journaling or speaking into a recorder. I think there's lots and lots and lots of forms of reflection that can take place. Um, a couple of just really brief things, and if you don't want to get into reflection now, we don't have to. We could save it for later. It's up to
No,
you.
no, no. Let's talk about it. I was
Okay.
going to bring up. Um, I said that a lot of people obviously are listening to this on an audio podcast, but what I'm holding up on my camera here is it's a box. Okay, this is a box, maybe the size of maybe two decks of cards, about the thickness of a deck of card, and it says reflection collection, and in it are is and in fact a big stack of cards. Now, you actually created this reflection collection. You want to tell us a little bit about this? By the way, in the Education Scholar Conversation, we never sell any products. I'm not selling this product, but I know that you created this. I loved it so much. I bought this, and I have a stack of cards here. It's right here on my desk. It has not left my desk because I look at it all the time. Want to tell us a little bit about that, because I think
Yeah.
you have an incredible mind in looking at something in a thousand different ways. And every time you look at it again, I think you come up with a couple more ways of doing so.
Well,
Um, yeah.
I think you've just hit on one of the great parts of reflection, right? And a theme of what we've been talking about, right? Is
Mhm.
how can you look at the same thing and get something different out of it each time? So again, so far, if there's a theme to our conversation, that might be it. And I'm totally flattered that you actually have the box on your desk. I think I have mine on my desk somewhere. It's probably under my desk at this point. So you're doing better than I am. I want to back up and say the origin of this, and again, it's hard to pick a particular origin. Was I wanted reflection for my students to be fun. I
Mhm.
wanted it to be things that would be sticky, things that they would remember later,
Mhm.
that it wouldn't just be, I want you to reflect on where the material that we did today might be useful out in the real world. That's fine. That will get them reflect. I've just taught you about some concept in thermodynamics, find something that would attach to that. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think that for the instructors out there, please do that. It's great. What I wanted to do with these cards was to say reflection can be a part of your life, just your general learning patterns in general, and that it's a muscle. And I know that that's an overused metaphor, that because we
Mhm.
talk about lots of things being a muscle,
Mhm.
but I really do think that reflection is a muscle. You get better at it the more you do it, and like most things you practice, and you can imagine a tennis swing or kicking a soccer ball or whatever, when you do it for the first couple of times, it's very conscious. It has to be intentional. It doesn't feel natural or normal in any way, shape, or form. You have to kind of force yourself to do it and practice it over and over and over again.
Mhm.
But something awesome happens in practicing that skill or that muscle. And that is, it becomes kind of embedded in you, and you just begin doing it and you don't even realize you're doing it. You don't have to think about it anymore. It just happens. It's a part of your life.
This is,
So
by the way, just a reminder, this is Joe, the jazz improv musician, sitting right there.
Oh, absolutely, right. And I mean,
Yeah.
to follow that thread a minute, I mean that's why, as any sort of musician or artist, especially performance folks, why you spend so much time practicing and practicing and practicing and practicing, so that by the time you actually get to the performance, you're not thinking about the lick anymore or the run anymore or the whatever, right? You're able to actually be in the moment, and it just comes out. And you talk to any, again, not to go off on too many tangents, but Csikszentmihalyi, psychologist,
Hmm. Flow.
talks
Yeah.
about the flow experience, right? And in many cases, that's, he doesn't quite say it this way, but the folks who achieve that flow experience are usually the ones that they're so adept at what they're doing that they can go on autopilot, and they're literally living in the moment and just doing it. So what these reflection cards were meant to do was to
Mhm.
give students some fun exercises that they can do that would show them how reflection can become a part of their everyday life.
Mhm.
And so it's a series of bunch of exercises. Most of them only take 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes.
Yep.
Just to give an example of one of them, it was, and I'll probably get this wrong. You have the cards in front of
I
you.
have the
Um,
cards. I'm gonna
what?
check on you.
What? Yeah, yeah, yeah. You have to check. Isn't this terrible, right? It's like citing yourself. I'm going to plagiarize myself now. That's terrible, right? Um, one of them is about blueprinting a house, but
Yep.
this house is going to have rooms that represent who you are. So you get to actually, right, like draw out on a piece of paper, what would a
Hmm.
house be if it was representing you, and what rooms would there be, and how big would they be, and
Hmm.
which rooms would be next to which rooms. And then you can go deeper and begin asking, like, where's the front door to this house? So when someone first meets you, what room would they normally come into? And
Hmm.
you can get right. So it's kind of
Hmm.
building on this metaphor, and
Right.
it's fun in class to students begin to get it. Like, oh well, houses also have windows. So like, where would there be a window in this house? Like, where
Right.
could someone kind of peer in and see? Maybe not stand in the room with me, but they can kind of get a little glimpse of it. And so again, it's meant to be an interesting, unique exercise that's not sit down
Hmm.
and write me a journal entry. Again,
Yep.
perfectly fine exercise, but it's getting them to do something interesting. And what naturally happens, which is the most fun part about all of these, is I get emails from students afterward all the time saying, "Oh, I show this to my hallmates, and then like we did it, or I did this with my roommate. Like,
That's
we
awesome. Yeah.
realized that, like, we have none of our rooms are in common, but we have this one room that was in common. Then we had this great discussion about it." And
Hmm.
so it's like, yes, that discussion was fun that you had with your roommate,
Hmm.
but it was you exercising your subconscious reflective skill. and,
Right.
and I think that's kind of the deeper reason and rationale underlying the cards. um, the other part was to use them as an advisor. So
Hmm.
we've given these actually out to a number of advisors to, in some sense, almost prescribe cards
Hmm.
to students. So you meet a student and they say, I'm trying to work my way through this or work
Right.
my way through that. And you can send them off with 2 or 3 cards and say, next time we meet, I'd
Yeah.
I'd love to chat about this. So it gives them a little bit of something to come back with.
I really think this is lovely. I mean, I feel like that in the I have gone to countless you know conferences that a lot of people talk about reflection, and I always find that um, there's a desire. I think everyone knows it doesn't exist, but there's a desire to say, "What's our silver? But what's that one prompt that can
Right,
get students to
right,
reflect?" And everyone knows it doesn't really work like that, right?
right.
But at the same time, it's like, well, then there's anecdotes of, "Hey, that's a good way to ask this." Is good, but what you've done that I love is that you create different models. See, I'm
Hmm.
learning, by the way.
Yeah.
You're creating different models of that takes you out of what you normally do.
Right.
Such as if you're not an architect, I allow you to think like one. You have one that's about a painter,
Yep.
right? You can see where all my favorites are because
Oh
obviously
yeah, you're going right for all the arts ones.
all the arts ones. You have 40 of them,
Yep.
and you know what? Which one I actually really like, and I just think it's so
Oh yeah,
poetic.
now
It's
now I'm
literally,
curious.
I think, poetic. It's called slow motion.
Ah,
I love it. I'm going to read this. Is that okay?
sure, yeah.
Description: there are many actions that have become so habitual that we speed through them. In fact, you probably no longer consciously think about them anymore. Yet, slowing down and deconstructing a simple action can be a powerful form of meditation and can reveal deep patterns about who you are. And then you have an activity that sort of goes with it. To me, these are just really smart way for you to just get out of the rut.
Mhm.
It reminds me of I think it was, we didn't talk about D school yet, but
Oh,
it
yeah.
reminds me a little bit of uh, um, I think it was also a deck of cards that the
Yep,
industrial designers, and I think it was actually IDEO that came up with this.
yep.
That people that were behind the D school, um, and I remember doing this as a design student. Um, and I remember drawing a card, and it would say, whatever object that you're doing, pretend you're the object and talk about your day.
Right.
And you have to go into like this improv mode where you go, okay, I'm a spoon. This is where I started during I saw light when the drawer opened,
Opened,
and you
right,
have to kind of like go through with it. But what it does is that it allows you to see the world in a different perspective, in
right.
different lens, and through different ways. And sometimes nothing comes about that,
Mhm.
about it, and you just kind of have to keep going. But sometimes you discover things that you just sort of, it changes how you think about the world.
Yep. So something you said there just pinged something in my head, and I use the word ping on purpose for
Uh-huh.
the folks who are old school, Unix programmer type folks, because my whole thesis was almost all computer modeling. So we don't need to get into all that unless you. My guess is your listeners don't want to know about my geeky sitting in windowless rooms coding for supercomputers. Um, an analogy that I really love is in a lot of supercomputers, high-end computers, there's, or at least used to be, a place that there was called the scratch space, right? It was kind of the place where all the overflow and all the extra stuff just kind of got pushed aside. And you'd put it there because you didn't quite know what to do with it, or it was kind of extra, or you might need it later but you're not really sure, right? It was like the junk drawer in your kitchen, right? Everything goes in that drawer. um, I think we all have that to some degree mentally,
Mhm.
and it's interconnected with other things, but those are all the pieces that you're unsure about, right? The mental versions, you're not quite sure what to do with them, so just stick them in the junk drawer, the mental junk drawer.
Mhm.
What's really fun to see is how much these kind of simple exercises often activate something that's been sitting in someone's junk drawer,
Mhm. But
mental
it's
junk drawer,
useful. Yeah, sure.
yeah, for a long time, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden they go, "Wow, like, I never realized that that was this or that." Or, if you go to the blueprint model, it's it's not a main room, it's more like a closet, right? It's something
Mhm.
kind of over there, and it's worth looking at every once in a while because there's some stuff in there that might be interesting or useful or give me a little bit more insight. Um, so again, I've found that often the habit of reflection,
Mhm.
it becomes a habit at first, but you at first only apply it to the things that are those, if we keep going with this analogy, the main rooms, right?
Mhm.
Who am I? What's my career going to be? What am I learning right in the moment? You apply them to the things that are conscious and top of mind. Um, but that it also opens up the possibility that every once in a while something from the junk drawer comes out, and rather than just let it pass by and stick it back in the drawer, you go, like, that's interesting. I want to pull that out. I want to look at that as an object and look at it, like you said, through a variety of different lenses. May not take long, but
Mhm.
if it's a habit, if it's a skill you've gotten, it doesn't take long, and it may
Yeah.
just happen unconsciously. So I've seen, and this is not necessarily even a personality type. I've seen lots of different folks, introvert, extrovert, folks who love organization, right? Very rigid, versus
Mhm.
folks that are like super uber creative. That kind of reflection can be a very balancing piece for them.
Mhm.
It allows the creative folks to, they've kind of stuffed the organizational part of them maybe in the junk drawer, and it allows them to pull it out and look at it a little
Yeah.
bit more. So again, and same thing for the organizational folks. There's probably a creative piece in there that they've kind of said like, yeah, no, that's not me. I'm going to stick it in the junk drawer. But it gives them the opportunity to take it out and rethink about it for a bit. Um, I've done that myself. I think, we've talked about jazz improv and dance improv and right, this kind of improv nature, and that is me for sure. But over time, I've learned that I actually have some pretty powerful organizational skills that I can use to balance
Mhm.
the creative side of me.
Yeah.
Um, and frankly, to some degree, those are the tools now in my current job that I probably use more often, even though they don't feel quite as comfortable.
This concludes part 1 of our conversation with Joe Tranquillo from Bucknell University. To hear part 2, be sure to subscribe to Digication Scholars Conversations on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Digication Scholars Conversations is brought to you by Digication, a technology platform powering the most innovative e-portfolio programs in K-12 and higher education. Our website can be found at digication.com. This episode was produced by Jeff Yan and Drew Albanesius. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please like, subscribe, and share with a friend. Thanks for watching.